Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. My husband is on his way home, so I thought that I would just jump on here real quick and read a meditation to start our week off with. So, happy Monday. How are you guys doing today? You having a good week? All right, let's get into The Language of Letting Go by Melody Beatty, the sister book to Codependent No More. And let's see what today's meditation says, or the last couple days. We can read in here and see. Can you believe it's the last week, the last full week of September? I know. Okay, I think Monday next week is the last. Is it the 30th next Monday? Which means it's the last day of September, and then we're in October. I feel like September just kind of flew by. It's crazy. So anyway, happy last week of September. All right, let's get in here and see what the meditations are today. Tolerance is today. Trusting ourselves was yesterday. Letting go of urgency. I mean, yesterday and the day before were short meditations. Spontaneity was the 20th. Apologies were the 19th. Let's just kind of read today's and maybe like go back and go back. You know what? I remember doing this one last year because I said I don't love the word tolerance. So let's actually do trusting ourselves from yesterday. Trusting ourselves. Many of us believed that heeding the words of God or our higher power meant following rigid rules, an instruction booklet for life. Many of us now believe differently. The rigid rules, the endless instructions, the exhortation to perfection are not the words our higher power whispers. The words of God are often those still, small words we call intuition or instinct, leading and guiding us forward. We are free to be who we are, to listen to and trust ourselves. We are free to listen to the gentle, loving words of a higher power, words whispered to and through each of us. Today, help me, God, to let go of shame-based rigid rules. I will choose the freedom of loving, listening, and trusting. What an interesting meditation and very, God-centered. I think I'm going to take this outside of the realm of just like religious belief or spiritual belief, but I will explain this for me. You know, I grew up going to church. I've shared a lot about that. I grew up going to a Lutheran church. It was a pretty liberal-minded Lutheran church. I don't remember being told, like, you have to believe this, you have to believe that. I don't remember that at all from the church that I grew up in. In fact, I even remember, like, the sermons being very, like, open-minded about news events that were occurring and kind of, like, the way that we would look at those news events in today's time and things like that. But I don't really remember being like told you have to believe this. I mean, obviously there were, the commandments and the Bible and things like that, but I don't remember it ever being like forced down my throat. I think which led me to a spiritual open-mindedness that allowed me to, when I got sober, decide what my higher power would be. I've seen so many friends of mine really, really struggle with this in sobriety because they did grow up in religions that said, if you think this way, if you do this, if you believe this, you're going to hell. Like, brimstone and fire and things like that. Like, you're going to burn in hell for eternity. If you think this way, if you do this. I have a friend of mine that would say to me, like, the way that she was raised was, if you think it, you did it. So, and that still is in her head today. I have a couple friends, actually, that were raised in, very fundamental religions and things like that. And I don't relate to that at all because I didn't grow up in that. And I grew up very much, with two parents that really had a lot of, different kind of belief systems. And I think within their own belief systems also kind of allowed themselves to venture out. I've shared this a lot that both of my parents, so my mom she actually grew up started going through it with a friend to an Episcopalian church. And then when she married my dad, she converted over to being Lutheran. There were several different kinds of being Lutheran. There was like Missouri Synod, which is a little bit more serious. I don't know that much about it today, in all honesty, but we were not that. We were like the more liberal version of the Lutheran church, which is a Protestant church. But even towards the end of my mom's life, my mom, I wouldn't even say towards the end of it. I would say like when I was probably in my late 20s, my mom started reading a lot about Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and things like that. And in fact, one of my mom's favorite books was a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ. She actually gave me a version of it. About the comparisons between Christ and Buddha and things like that. And my dad as well looked into a lot of that. And I think for those of you that know, my husband is an atheist, if you guys have heard me tell that. And, it's interesting because people a lot will say, Peter, you're such a spiritual person. How does that work in your marriage? Well, we both respect each other's ideology. We both respect each other's belief systems. And, my husband will say to me things like, do you think that you need to pray on this or, whatever. And, or he'll ask me questions and I ask him questions and likewise. And I think that that's getting to know each other. It makes me kind of sad today that we live in this world where we don't really feel like we can ask people questions about things, or people always feel like their thought or their way is always the right way, you know, especially when it comes to issues like belief systems and philosophies and things like that about world issues. And we don't really know what somebody else's experience is until we've walked around their own shoes or their shoes about it. And we never even really will truly understand somebody else's experience, right? So to have those conversations, to ask those questions, I feel like I had a lot of those when I was growing up. I feel like I grew up, you know, in like junior high and high school with like, well, more high school with my friends, you know. I think high school is such a period of questioning about, you know, God and higher powers and authority and all that kind of stuff. And I think we kind of put that all together. I do remember being in high school and, you know, up until about, I think it was about 15, I was told I had to go to church every Sunday. And then around that time was when my parents kind of let me decide whether or not I wanted to go to church or not. And a lot of it, to me, honestly, just I didn't want to get up early on a Sunday morning. It really wasn't even that. I don't know that I even thought it out that deeply, if you want to know the truth. But I remember going to, when I was in high school, there was like several churches that kind of were all combined, and they had like this big youth group and stuff. And so I would be in classes where people would say things, like not in class, but to each other. I mean, this was public high school, but to each other, like, well, Jesus said this, or our Lord says that. And I mean, these were popular kids. And I was like, this is just so phony. Like, do they really believe it? And I think for me, what it was that I had never had, and I'm not taking away their experience. I don't know. They might have had true experiences with a higher power. I had never internalized any kind of spiritual belief at that point. Like, I think I was always looking for a burning bush moment. I never had that, you know? And so I was always looking for like proof. I think that kind of started my interest in like, spiritual mediums and psychics, tarot card readings and things like that. I think that was because I was like looking for some proof of an afterlife, which therefore would be proof of, you know, a spiritual life would be proof of God. I think that was kind of where that interest started for me. I'm still interested in that stuff today, but not as much now as I have a pretty like strong, you know, faith today, I would say, compared to even 2 or 3 years ago. But you know, it's interesting to me when you look at this idea of, rules that you have to follow. I don't think that it's just about a spiritual or religious belief. I think that we grow up with our families or in our communities or in our neighborhoods with this idea of, or this ideology of certain rules that we have to follow, you know? And I don't know, like necessarily today it's a lot different, but when I was growing up, the idea of going to college and having a good job or starting a good job right out of college or right out of high school was kind of like the two options, you know? It wasn't like go travel. I mean, I can remember people doing it, but I thought, oh God, like who does that? And so those were really like the two options. And I don't really even remember that many people talking to me about like trade schools, hair school, going to work at just a factory. I mean, those just weren't really discussions. And then the other thing was like getting married and having kids. I think that was very much expected. That's not the world that we live in today. I think part of it was my generation, the generation that came after, kind of breaking those molds, you know? I think, you know, I look back on, I had all friends that were girls in high school. All my friends in high school were girls. And we had a pretty close group of girlfriends. Well, out of that group, only 2, I would say, only 2 out of 6 have had, 8 have had kids. Only 2 of them. And I think that's kind of strange. Like one of my friends has had 1 child, and my other friend had twins. And so it's not like they had families of 4 and 5. Almost all my friends, and even my friends in college, chose not to have kids. I think that was kind of going against a societal norm, you know, that it's a decision that we're making today. It's a decision that these are the rules that were expected of us, that we were supposed to get married and have kids and live in this kind of house. And I don't want to do that. I remember when a friend of mine, when he wanted to live, before he wanted to go to medical school, he got his degree in chemical engineering. And so he was working for a pharmaceutical company in Los Angeles. And then he wanted to live in New York City. So, cause he wanted to live on each coast. And so he lived in LA I think he lived in San Francisco and then LA. And he lived there for about 3 or 4 years. And then he moved to New York for 2 years. And then he came back to Indiana and he went to medical school. And, he was like, I know I'm going to settle down after medical school, you know, and, figure out what I'm going to do, buy a house and all that kind of stuff. So I want to live like on each coast before I do that. And I can remember thinking at the time, like, who does that? Like, you know, and my, like right after my generation was when people started like taking a gap year, traveling. I mean, that was kind of my generation that really like, I mean, that was kind of unheard of when you talk, I mean, now you hear people say gap year all the time. But when I was around, like, I can remember when people say that and I'd be like, you're taking a gap year? Like, yeah, I'm traveling to Europe for a year. I mean, that was so unheard of and kind of almost kind of looked down on. So when you talk about these rules aren't necessarily religious specific. They're family rules, or how you're raised, of what belief systems you're supposed to have. I think that's even almost a kind of a harder conversation to have. When you're at family gatherings and, Uncle John, I don't have an Uncle John, so I can make that name up. Uncle John is spouting off something that you 100% don't believe in or you don't agree with, right? Do you say something? Do you not say something? I feel blessed that I don't really have family where I have to have that. But I have been put in situations before where somebody is saying something. I'm like, this so completely goes against my philosophy, my ideology, completely. And I do say something today because I've learned that to be quiet is to be complicit to that. And also, it kind of is like silently agreeing with that person, And the things that I would stand up for, I'm not saying I'm going to fight over somebody about, should we put a 7-Eleven up the street? That's kind of an issue that I might stay silent about. But when it comes to really like philosophical belief systems, especially ones that I believe in that affect my life and affect the lives of those people that I love, especially when it comes to affecting those people that I love that I'm protective of, yes, I do stand up and I do say something today. And I think that I was kind of brought up in a world where you don't stand up and say those things, that you kind of just stay silent. My mother was such a fighter. She would stand up and say stuff all the time. All the time she would stand up and say stuff about what she believed. And I think she kind of paved that road for me a little bit, My dad was very much of the belief system that you don't make waves, that you don't say those things, whatever. And then I found out later that when I came out, there have been some doctors, because my dad's a retired surgeon, there have been some doctors that were like in surgery and things like that were making some kind of like lighthearted homophobic jokes. And my dad like put him in their spot and was like, you're not doing that. Like, my son just came out. This is very, very serious to me. I found out about that later, And I was really like, to be honest with you, I was more proud of my dad in that moment for doing that than... It wasn't like a right or wrong kind of thing. I was like proud of my dad. I was like, it wasn't even about me in that moment. It was about that my dad took a stand. It wasn't like he screamed and yelled at those people. He just said, we're not going to do this. Like, my son just came out. I'm learning about this stuff. Like, we're not going to be, and my dad's always been my biggest advocate ever since I came out. He said to me, when I came out, I knew that we were going to have this conversation when you were like 4 years old. I knew we were going to have this conversation. So he's always been my biggest advocate. But to know that he was fighting for me in rooms I'm not in, like, that's a huge thing for me today. So when we're talking about these rules, I don't know that we're necessarily talking about religious or spiritual rules. I think that is a big part of it. For people that were brought up in religious families or religious communities where it was like, if you have to believe this, this, and this, and this, or you're a sinner and you're being damned to eternal hell. I think that's almost kind of a scarier thing because you're raising that as a child. And so you have that belief system in your head that if I don't believe this or if I don't go along with this, then I am going to burn in eternal hell. And like that goes into your adulthood, right? I didn't necessarily have that. But I do think that I grew up with a belief system of rules, even not just from my parents, but from authority figures in school, from teachers. Here's just a good example. When I would, when anything would happen at school, like the bullying, I would have, administrators say to me, like, what are you doing that is like, why are you the one that's instigating this? And so I would start asking myself, am I the one instigating this? I know today I'm not the one instigating that stuff. If it happens, it doesn't happen like that, but I'm talking about when I was growing up. I can remember being in high school and sitting across from the dean and the dean being like, what did you do to instigate this? I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't even say this. I just sat there silently. I didn't know what to say. But those were the rules back in the day, right? Like, if two people are involved in something, well, somebody had to instigate it. What are you doing to instigate? Because these kids over here, they're stars of the school. I don't know you. So that was the rule, the less than rule, right? So we do grow up with these rules. And I think it's picking and choosing what rules you're going to fight against, I am a rule follower. That's what's so kind of funny about it is I am a rule follower in this world. I like rules. I think rules give me structure. But when I find rules that don't necessarily align with, I think, humanity, or I don't think the rules align with fairness towards human beings, all human beings, it's a rule that I question. It's a rule that I want to sit down and have a conversation about. I don't necessarily go, you're an idiot, blah, 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 but I want to sit down and say, okay, why is this? Why does this rule exist? Why is this happening? Just as an example, take it deep here for a second. Marriage equality was something I really never understood, if you want to know the truth. And one of the reasons why I never understood it was because the people that I wanted to fight about it the most, I would say to them, and they really never had anything to come back on. They would just go, oh, it's family values and it's whatever, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. and I won't even get into that whole conversation, but what they would say, I'd say to them, so on your deathbed, when you're looking back, because my husband and I want to get married, because we want to have the same rights as other married couples do. We want to be able to pay taxes together and own a home together. And, oh, you can do all that kind of stuff. No, we can't really do all that kind of stuff. It's 10 times more difficult. We want to be treated like a married couple. We want to be respected as a married couple. Well, that's a violation of family values. So I look at some of these people and I would say, at the end of your life on your deathbed, okay, when you look back on your life, is your proudest moment going to be that you kept two people of love apart? Well, it's about family values. Well, okay. Coming from people that didn't even really follow family values to begin. They didn't even try to step inside my shoes and understand why that might be important to me. That was a rule that was important for me to fight. That was a rule for me to question. That was a rule for me to need to understand why somebody was so laser focused on how me being married to my husband took anything away from them. And what I proved was it didn't. Didn't take anything away from them whatsoever. My being married to my husband, and we've been married since 2014, so 10 years that we've been married, and 13 years that we've been since our wedding. We've been legally married for 10 years, and the 13 years that we've been married together. I don't think that our being married has taken one thing away from any traditional family out there. Not one thing. So, I think there are certain things, certain ideologies, certain rules, certain belief systems that we should have to fight. And I think that for me, I'm at a point where it's like I pick and choose what arguments I want to have. What are things I want to fight? And sometimes I will tell you this is one of the things I've really, really learned in the last couple years. I can fight things silently too. I can question rules silently. I can just say, I don't agree with that and I'm not going to abide by it. And I don't even have to say that part out verbally. I can just know it in my heart and soul, and not agree with it. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.